Hey everybody, Brian here with BPS Customs, and today what we're going to do is take another stab at the budget gaming system that I put together in this video up here. I encourage you to go check that one out before you dive into this one. But for this, we're going to do a sub $500 AMD based gaming system. So a lot of the criticism that I received on that previous video wasn't anything to do with the performance of the machine or anything like that. It was more along the lines of the accessibility of the parts. Now, if you haven't watched that video, what I did was I scoured a couple different sites for the best deals that I could find, Craigslist, open box items, things of that nature, to put together a system that both stayed around the $500 price point and also performed like an absolute gaming beast. Most people loved that video, and I'm really appreciative to the people that provided me with some positive feedback. However, I did get a number of people on Twitter and on YouTube criticizing the video for very similar things, and that was, well, we can't get these parts. How do you get these prices? I understand. And I did try to address that in the video towards the end when I discussed that the video was made more of like a proof of concept than as an actual, this is the exact thing that you could go out and build right now. However, I understand that people really like direction. So what I'm going to do today is put together a system cheaper than I put together the previous system for. However, it will have some performance shortcomings when compared to the other system, just because we're dealing with only new components this time, components that everybody has access to. And you really run into some limitations when doing that, as far as, you know, if you're butting up against the price ceiling, where do you make those compromises? The biggest compromise that you're going to make, obviously, is going to be in the video card. But let's get into the prices right now. I'm going to run down the components and tell you how we're going to build this system. All right, so the first thing and the most important thing is, what processor are we using? At BPS Customs, we pretty strictly adhere to the guidelines that we only use Intel processors in our builds. This isn't to say that there aren't worthwhile AMD processors out there and that you can't get good performance out of them. However, the architecture that AMD is still pushing to the mainstream is 4 to 5 years old at this point and simply cannot perform with Intel processors released within the last year or so. I think this is the biggest reason that Skylake has taken off as it has. It's a mainstream product, it is affordable, it is accessible, and it has a huge amount of aftermarket support as far as motherboards go. By contrast, AMD is really lagging behind, and the question really remains, how is Zen going to fix the situation? We're really not sure. That being said, for gaming, AMD processors are still very viable. Most games are not CPU intensive and rely more on the video card, so any moderately capable AMD processor should get the job done. So what I did here was visited the Micro Center website. They have a feature where you can create a motherboard and processor bundle, and what we have is the AMD 8320E processor and the MSI 970 gaming motherboard. Now, this bundle together came in at a price of $140. That is a super good price for both the processor and the motherboard, considering that the processor alone usually costs about $100. Second part is the RAM. I found this kit of Kingston HyperX DDR3 for $63, and this is a 16 gig kit. So we're going to get some decent performance out of this RAM, I'm pretty sure, and shouldn't run into any issues where we're going to need to upgrade it in the future at all. The video card we're going to go with is the Asus GeForce GTX 750 Ti. Clearly not the cutting edge right now, still something that's going to get you some decent 1080p performance, and something that's not going to break the bank at $120. As you guys have probably seen in some of my builds before, I'm a huge fan of ADATA SSDs. The ADATA 240 gig SSD can be had right now on Newegg for $58, so that's what we're going to go with for the storage in this build. Now, before we move on to the power supply and case, I just wanted to discuss how I'm going to go about doing this build in this system. What I'm actually going to do is build this on my test bench. I haven't put together a time lapse yet of building on the test bench. I know that for most people, it's really kind of irrelevant. Nobody really uses a test bench as their actual system, but the power supply and the case are basically irrelevant. when it comes to system performance. And honestly, it's really up to you what you want to use for those components. For the power supply in this case, I went with an EVGA 500 watt, 80 plus bronze rated power supply. It only runs $40 on Newegg, but you could use any number of components basically in that price range that'll pretty much serve you the same. As far as what we're gonna put in the system, once again, a component that I've used before is a Thermaltake Tough Power 650. It's not going to influence the performance of the system, and it's what I have here right now that I usually use with my test bench. So that's what we're going to put in the system just for the purposes of testing. The case that I picked out for this build, just as to use as an example, is the Deepcool Ducasse mid-tower ATX. I don't know why they would name it that. Deepcool Ducasse. Come on, guys, why? It's a Deepcool case. It's all black, it's got decent room for cable routing, and it comes in at $55, bringing the total for the system to $476, well below our $500 price point. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna throw together a time lapse here of me building the system on the test bench. Like I said, the parts that I am gonna be using are all of the parts that matter as far as performance goes, and the things that I'm not gonna be using, the power supply and the case, really don't matter, and that is personal preference for you. There are many choices within the price range that I named. You could actually probably get things for less money if you need to, although I wouldn't really suggest skimping out on the power supply all that much. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put this all together. We're gonna see how it performs. Don't expect numbers that are going to be comparable to the previous budget system that I put together, simply because the graphics card is not going to be nearly as powerful, but we should get some decent 1080p performance for under $500, all components new and easily accessible to everybody. So how'd we do? Well, after putting the system together and booting it up for the first time, it did seem a little sluggish. The AMD chips are actually very good overclockers. So I boosted the core clock up to 3700 megahertz. It could certainly go higher than this, but I was on the stock cooler. You could add an aftermarket cooler to the setup and not really kill your budget all that much. but we wanted to stay under that $500, so we're going with the stock cooler. So we're at 3700 megahertz on the CPU. The GPU, I went with plus 175 on the core, plus 175 on the memory. These are fairly aggressive numbers for the 750 Ti. Especially with the stock cooler on it without water cooling or anything like that. But the temperatures maintain themselves very well throughout the suite of tests. Temperatures never went higher than about 60 degrees C, and that's perfectly acceptable. So I ran my standard suite of tests. That's Cinebench R15, Firestrike, Metro, Valley, and GTA 5. Came out with the following results. Cinebench scored a respectable 588. Firestrike scored 4109. Metro came back at 54 frames per second. Valley was at 45.9 frames per second. And GTA 5 was 52.3 frames per second. Now please note that the GTA 5 benchmark actually was run with the distance scaling set to maximum. So this is really pushing this processor as far as it can go. And you know, the results that came back are perfectly playable numbers. Benchmarks are generally going to give you figures that are lower than what you would normally expect to see. And if benchmarks didn't do this, they wouldn't be doing their job. They're meant to push your system and to see what it's capable of. If all benchmarks came back scoring, maxing out 200 frames per second for every test, there'd be no point in getting better hardware. So, these benchmarks are made to score the system a little bit lower so that it can be easily compared to other systems. And the results that we got are fantastic for the price that we paid. So if you're looking to do 1080p gaming, a setup like this is perfectly reasonable. You could look to maybe get a little bit better of a graphics card if you have a few extra dollars, but the processor, honestly, for the price you're paying for the CPU and motherboard combo, I don't know, it might be hard to beat. Even the Skylake G4400 Pentium is not going to perform as strongly as this, and this has so much overclocking headroom if you can get a good cooler on it. So it's actually something that I might recommend to some people looking to build a gaming system on a budget. So hopefully this video was a little bit more informative and a little bit more real life than maybe my last budget gaming system video. Maybe people can take this parts list and build something of their own, similar or maybe even the same, and be gaming at 1080p for the next couple of years and be just fine. I think if you take down some of the settings on these games even a little bit, you'll be able to easily push past 60 frames per second. Keep in mind that all my benchmarks were run at very high settings, so you could certainly expect to get a little better performance even on high or something like that in most games. All right, well, I guess that's it. I didn't really have anything else planned for today for this system. I suppose I have these parts now. If someone is interested in buying this from me, I guess you could let me know. I'd probably put it together in something other than my test bench. But I think for the purposes of this video and for the purposes of establishing baseline performance for these kinds of components, I think this was a pretty good test. So I'm Brian with BPS Customs, and as always, thanks for watching.